Hi, I'm Andre Butler, and welcome to our show today. Everybody has dreams. Everybody has those things that we like to accomplish before we leave this world. And God has a dream for your life as well. You might be watching this today wondering, how come my dream hasn't happened yet? Why do things seem to be delayed? And the answer might just be that you need to hustle. You need to do your part so that God can do His part. And we've talked about that over the last couple of weeks. Today I want to shift our focus, and I want to talk about the fact that God will do His part, that God has your back. The Bible teaches in one of my favorite Psalms that God is a God who will cause whatever you do to prosper. It talks about the fact in 2 Chronicles chapter 26 that a man by the name of King Uzziah saw God prosper whatever he put his hand to. It talks about the fact in Genesis 39 that there was a man by the name of Joseph who was a slave, and yet God prospered what he did in his master's house. And then God prospered him in the prison house. And then God prospered him as he became prime minister of Egypt. See, God is a God who will add His super to your natural. He's a God who will cause you to have success in whatever you're putting your hand to, as long as you're following Him and you're being diligent and carrying out the responsibility that He's given you. I want you to see that God's got your back, that He's going to make things work for you. And I want you to be confident in that. I want you to be like David and walk on the battlefield facing impossible odds and actually talk a little junk to the devil and let him know what God's going to do. I want you to be that individual that can go on a battlefield with the jawbone of a donkey and face 1,000 men, 100% confident that I'm going to win today. You can do that because God has your back. And so today's message is really going to encourage you. It's going to equip you to walk by faith and not by sight. It's going to equip you to do the impossible with God's help. So pay attention today. Open your heart. Allow God to stir up your heart and stir up your faith, and then get ready to do something great in Him.
You know, there's somebody else like that. His name is David. Everybody knows the story of David and Goliath. And David was about 17 years old. He wasn't even qualified yet as far as his family was concerned to even be on the battlefield. You know, there was a war going on, and his family only sent a few of his brothers. They didn't even send him. He had to stay behind and watch the sheep. But if you know the story, he showed up to bring his brothers, some fish and chips, a little something from Shake Shack, And when he did, he heard Goliath, the Goliath is talking junk. He's like, hey, man, your God is nothing. I want to prove it. I'll send one man out here. And once I kill him, then y'all have to serve us. And Israel was terrified. They're like, nobody was going to fight this man. This man was huge. He was massive. He was a champion. And so this has been going on for 40 days. They've been getting punked for 40 days. I don't know if people say that anymore, but that's what we used to say. And so David hears about it, and David starts asking around, well, what do you get if you kill this guy? They're like, well, the king, you'll be tax-free. You get to marry the king's daughter. Ooh, okay. And so David asks somebody else, and finally the king finds out that this guy's asking these questions. And he stands before the king, and he says, don't worry about it. I got this. I'll fight Goliath. And the king's like, you've lost your mind. You're 17 years old. This guy's been a man of war since he was 17, since he was a teenager. And yet David says, hey, I fought a lion, and I killed him with my bare hands. I fought a bear, and I killed him. The God who gave me victory over them will give me victory over this giant. What's he saying? I believe God's got my back. And so you read in 1 Samuel 17 that when he goes to the battlefield, he doesn't go with Saul's armor. Saul, the king of Israel, tries to put his armor on him, and he says, no, I haven't proved this out. Instead, it says in 1 Samuel 17:40 that he picked up 5 smooth stones from a stream and put them into a shepherd's bag. Then, armed only with his shepherd's staff and sling, he started across the valley to fight the Philistine. He went out here to fight a man who had he had a breastplate that was 130 pounds. He had a huge spear. He had a huge sword. He had, he had a huge helmet. He had a guy next to him who held his shield. He's about 9 feet tall. Imagine Shaq, but bigger. Okay? He went to fight this guy with the staff, a sling, some stones. But there was one other thing he had. Nobody else could see it. But just like Goliath had a man holding his shield, he had God standing next to him on that battlefield as well. And he knew it. That's why who in their right mind would do this? Who in their right mind would chase a lion? You're watching sheep and a lion come and grab one of the sheep, and you're like, well, that's what I would do. Well, we lost one today, but we kept the rest. But I'm not Fossil can have it, right? But he knew something. He knew he had God's blessing on him. He knew that whatever he put his hand to in battle, God would prosper, and that's what happened his whole life. He knew God would back him up. I like something that Victoria Osteen says. She says, David faced Goliath with 5 smooth stones. But with God, the ordinary becomes extraordinary. So what do you have in your hand today? See, what I want you to get a hold of is just like God put his blessing on and prospered Uzziah and Joseph and Isaac and David. If you're somebody that's truly trying to follow him, he's put that same thing on you. He'll prosper whatever you do. You have a special advantage. You've got something other people don't have. You've got God backing you up when you start that business. You've got God backing you up when you start writing that book. You've got God backing you up when you go into that workplace. You got God backing you up when you start to shoot that movie. You've got God backing you up when you hit that court or that field. You got God on you, and that's why you will succeed. That's why you will have greater success. That's why you'll see your dreams come to pass, because it's not just you out here doing what you can do. You're doing what you can do, but God is behind you doing what he can do. And when God is helping you, woo! God's got your back. And you need to act like that. You need to be like David and step into the workplace like, I don't know what was happening before I got here, but it's going to work out right now. You need to step out and start writing whatever God tells you to write and believe this is going to be special. You need to step out into whatever that dream is and be 100% confident that God is going to work this thing out. And think about it. Most of us have already had our lions and our bears. God showed up for you in the past, and he killed some lions for you. God showed up in the past. He killed some bears for you. God has been there for you in your past, and the same God that had your back then is the God that will have your back right now. He is going to be there to help you bring about the dreams that he's placed in your heart. And you need to believe that. You got to know God's got your back. Somebody turn to them and tell them, God's got my back. Turn to somebody and tell them, God's got my back. And when you know that, then you can hustle. I can go here. I'm going to put the work in. I know this might happen, that might happen. It may not feel like I'm qualified, but God told me to do this. God put this gift in me. And I know as long as I do my part, God is going to make things work. Come on, Proverbs 21:31 reads in this way. It says, the horse is prepared for the day of battle. And that's us hustling, right? Doing our part. And we've talked about that for a couple of weeks. You put in your effort. You give 100% effort. right? You prepare, you study, you learn, you work. But when it's all said and done, deliverance is of the Lord. Ultimately, it's God that's going to give you supernatural results. When you do the natural, God will do the supernatural. That's how it works. You do the natural believing that God will do the supernatural. You know, a friend of mine, I'm working with him with the movie that I'm in the process of producing. That's cool to say, right? Like, yeah. So it's just him and I, we started off on this. And just a couple of weeks ago, it's been a couple of months now, I guess, that, God really got over to me that I needed to hustle. That I was waiting on God, and he was waiting on me. So that day, I figured that out. I called him. It's like, hey, man, and he happened to be in town. So he was like, well, let's go meet for lunch. We met for lunch, start talking about what we wanted to do, and, man, things have been moving along quickly. So I saw him again this week. We met for lunch because he was in town again, and he told me this story. He's like, man, when I came to town to do this casting call, we did a casting call last month. He said, I came to town for that. And when I was on the way, I ended up with this weird connection with this guy in town. And what ended up happening as a result of this, I won't tell too much of his business, is that he ended up in the middle of a phenomenal business opportunity. I mean, when he finished telling me what was going on and showing it to me, I was like, when you get your millions, can I hold some, please? I'm like, I could use some of that support because I'm like, wow. He's like, man, I was just coming to town to do the thing that, we believe God wanted us to do. And look what happened. And all of a sudden, he's connecting with celebrities, and this thing is blowing up. I just don't want to put his business out there. But I'm looking at this, and I'm like, see, look at this. You just step out to do just the natural things you can do. And then God opens us a whole other door. And you're going, wow. All he did was get on a plane and bam. That's how it works. You hustle. And then God's got your back. Now I want to end with this in 2 Kings chapter 8. And I want to tell a story that I think is really going to help some of us in here. So 2 Kings chapter 8, it says that then spake Elisha unto the woman whose son he had restored to life, saying, arise, and go thou and thine household, and sojourn wheresoever thou canst sojourn, or stay. For the Lord hath called for a famine, and it shall also come upon the land 7 years. And the woman arose and did after the saying of the man of God, and she went with her household and sojourned in the land of the Philistines 7 years. And it came to pass at the 7 years' end that the woman returned out of the land of the Philistines, and she went forth to cry unto the king for her house and for her land. So understand what's happened here. If you were to read a little earlier in 2 Kings, you find out that, God had done a miracle for her in giving her a son, and it was through the prophet Elisha. And so now Elisha says to her, hey, there's a famine coming. God told him ahead of time. He's a prophet. God will help you see things that are to come. If you're a believer today, God will do that for you. The Bible says the Holy Spirit will show you things to come. So he knew there was a famine coming. He said it's going to be 7 years. Y'all need to just get up and go somewhere so that you don't get hit hard by this famine. So she does that. And 7 years later, 7 years is a long time. 7 years? Some of us don't like it, but if you looked at yourself 7 years ago and now, you might like 7 years. No, I'm just kidding. It's a long time. She comes back after 7 years and discovers that somebody has taken her house and her land. You imagine that, coming home and somebody living in your house, driving your car, running your business, and you didn't sell it to them? So she comes back and she has nothing. And she ended up in this place simply because she obeyed God. Sometimes you obey God and it feels like you're taking a step back, but it's really a setup. Oh, I'm trying not to preach again to y'all. Sometimes you got to, it's like a rubber band. Sometimes you got to pull it back so you can go farther. Whew, that was good. That encouraged me. Like, yeah, that's right. That's right. No. So, but here she all she did was do what God said, and she's seen the lose, right? She's lost what she would have had. So she goes immediately to the king, as the scripture says, to cry to the king. Now, that's a strange thing to do. Why would you go to who do you think you are, going to the king? And the word cry here means to shriek. So she's not coming in here saying, hey, king, can I talk to you? I want my house back. They stole my land, king. You got to understand, in this day and age, that and we know it's not right, but women didn't have the same social position as men. So she, it would seem like this is a strange thing to do. Yet she did it because she knew she had obeyed God. And the only reason why she was in this position was because she had obeyed God. And she believed that God would back her up and restore to her what she had lost. Well, she was right. If you keep reading, it says, and the king talked with Gehazi, the servant of the man of God, saying, tell me, I pray thee, all the great things that Elisha hath done. And it came to pass, as he was telling the king how he had restored a dead body to life, that behold, the woman whose son he had restored to life cried to the king for her house and for her land. And Gehazi said, my lord, O king, this is the woman, and this is her son whom Elisha restored to life. And when the king asked the woman, she told him. Did you see what happened there? So the king happens to just be hanging out with Gehazi. He's kind of like Elisha's assistant. He's like, man, tell me some of the stories about what Elisha's done. So Elisha's, Gehazi is telling him all these stories, how Elisha healed this guy. And when he gets to the story of Elisha raising a boy from the dead, because that was this boy, that's when the mama walks in and starts screaming. Don't tell me God can't set stuff up. Don't tell me God can't have the right person in the right place at the right time, because that's exactly what he did. Gehazi said, hey, that's her. And the king says, is that right? She's like, yeah, that's me. She's smart. Yeah, that's me. That's right. So what happens to her? And the king appointed to her a certain officer, saying, restore all that was hers, and all the fruits of the field since the day that she left the land, even until now. You see what God did there? He restored everything she lost plus some. Come on, she didn't work that field for 7 years. Somebody else worked that field for 7 years. She got 7 years pay on top of getting her house back and getting her land back. God gave her a huge harvest at one time. What are you trying to say, Pastor? First of all, there are some things we need to cry to the king for today. Some of us, we've lost some money. We've lost some health. We've lost some relationships. We've lost some business. We've lost some opportunities. And some of it was we were obeying God. Some of it we messed up and we just went to God for forgiveness and mercy. But God is a God who forgives. God's a God of mercy. Some of us need to go to God for restoration, because God is not interested in the devil keeping anything he stole from you. Oh, y'all not hearing me today? God is not a God who's just going to chalk it up to some mistakes. No, he's a God who will give you back the years that you lost, even when you were messing up, if you'll believe for that, if you'll come to him and expect him to do that. He's a God who listen, I looked up this phrase today. Some of you know it. Accounts receivable. Right? What is that? Well, when you own a business and you provide a service to somebody and they haven't paid you yet, right? You have the legal right to go to them and say, that's my money. Well, listen, there are some things that Satan has been holding on to that he really needs to pay you. There's some bills he has incurred he had the nerve to attack your body. He had the nerve to attack your child. He had the nerve to take your money. He had the nerve to cost you that job. He had the nerve to stop that business. And God is saying, no, it's due right now. It is due season today. Cry for what belongs to you. You might say, Pastor, what does that got to do with hustle? Well, we said something earlier. We learned that often the way God does things is that little by little, he gets you to that promised land. But there are times and there are seasons where God will accelerate things. Come on, when Jesus turned water to wine, that's a 20-year process, and he did it instantly. When Israel went to the slave owners and they told them, give me your gold and your silver and everything that you have, give me your raiment, and they gave them what was probably millions of dollars worth of money. That was God repaying them for 400 years of slavery, and he did it instantly. It doesn't have to take God all day to get a big return to you. And I believe, as we said at the beginning of the year, that this is a year of accelerated restoration. This is a year of accounts receivable. This is a year for you to claim back everything that Satan stole from you as you hustle. You ought to expect God to do some big things in your life right now. You ought to expect to see some big harvest. You ought to get your land back, get your house back, get your 7 years back, get it all back like nothing ever happened to you before. You went in the fire, and now you're going to come out, and you won't even smell like smoke. All you have is a testimony of what God did for you. Come on, anybody believe that today? Anybody accept that today? I'm claiming mine, and I want you to claim yours. There's another story that really was big on my heart. And it was David. David and his men were out. David messed up, if you know the story. They came back to their town called Ziklag. Everything was gone. A band of soldiers called the Amalekites had come in and burned the place. Took everything, including their wives and their children. And David was at a place where his own men that he had raised, he had helped, he had fought with, he loved, they thought about stoning him. Because they had lost everybody. They lost, can you imagine losing your kids? And it's this guy's fault. So he is at his lowest point. Everybody is now against him. He had already been dealing with Saul being against him. He already had to run away from his home country that he had saved in battle. Now even his own men want to kill him. He's lost his own family. And in that moment, the Bible says he encouraged himself in God. Then he went to God and he said, should I chase after these folk? Because, the chances of catching them are almost impossible. But, maybe you got away, God. God says chase them. You're going to restore. You're going to get everything back. So he did. Found them. They defeated him. He got back everything they stole. Everything. And then, 3 days later, Saul dies. Not too long after that, he becomes the king that God told him he would be. In 72 hours or so, he went from his deepest, darkest moment to living his dream. Some of you about 72 hours away. You might be sitting here down to nothing, but when you're down to nothing, God is up to something. You got to just encourage yourself in God and say, God, I believe you anyway. I trust you anyway. I may not have what I'm supposed to have. Things may have fallen apart, but I know you got my back. And I'm going to praise you, Lord, and I'm going to rejoice in you, Lord, and then step out in the hustle and watch God take you from your deepest moment to your highest high and give you what you've been dreaming for. If anybody believes that, lift your hands right now and just encourage yourself in God. Give God praise for your breakthrough right now. Give God praise for your restoration right now.
I hope that message really helped you. God has your back. God is a God who will cause your dreams to come to pass. There are just a few things that you need to remember. Number one, God has promised to prosper what you put your hand to. So you ought to expect success when you get to work. Number two, ultimately, it's God who's going to do the supernatural things that you need so that you can have the success that you want. You don't have to make it happen. You do your part and then sit back and watch God make it happen. And then number three, you can walk in supreme confidence knowing that God has your back. That's what we talked about today when we looked at David and how he walked on the battlefield with confidence. He actually talked a little junk. You know, he let the devil know what was going to happen that day. We can see the same thing in 2 Kings chapter 8 with the woman who came back to get her house in her land. She came boldly to the king and cried out for what belonged to her. And you can do the same thing because God has your back. You can be confident that my future is bright because I'm doing my part and God is doing his part. And when you're confident like that, when you're walking by faith, you can't help but experience the future that God has for you. I want to ask you to pray about something today. I would love for you to pray about becoming a partner with Andre Butler Ministries. Our mission is to help people who are far from God experience the future that he has for them. And we want to reach people all over the world. We want to reach millions for Jesus, but we can't do that without your help. So I would love for you to pray about becoming a part of our faith family. And if you're interested in getting information about that, text the word partner to 313-356-3366. Or you can go to andrebutler.com and get the same information there. I want to thank those that have already supported us, those who are already our partners, who are helping us to preach the gospel all over the world right now. And I want you to know that I'm excited because I believe that we're going to reach so many more people with your help. Always remember that God has a future for you. I'm excited about my newest book, Why Exist? Find Your Why. You know, I believe life doesn't really make sense until you know your why, until you know your purpose. And so God had me write a book to help people to discover not only that you have a purpose, but to discover what it is. One of my favorite parts of this book is a chapter called The Why Test, where we ask you certain questions to help you zoom in on what excites you, on what God made you to do. So I really want to encourage you to get a hold of this at andrebutler.com and find your why.